Okay, thanks, Conal, and welcome all of you. Uh, so whenever we were first talking about doing this talk, it was going to be face to face, obviously, and we said we thought we'll talk about social policy in a changing world. Now, to be perfectly honest with you, when we said that, we were thinking more of things like Brexit and just developments in terms of technology and all. It never occurred to us that we would actually be doing doing this webinar, that we'd be doing it as a webinar, and that we'd be doing it in the middle of a global pandemic. But actually, social policy has very much come to the fore in the course of that pandemic. And as I go through the talk, I think you'll start to see some of that. So first of all, just to say welcome. I'm part of the School of Applied Social and Policy Sciences here at Ulster University. And within that school, we have a number of degree courses around the issue of policy. So we have a social policy single honours degree. That's when you study only social policy issues. Or we have social policy with criminology or social policy with sociology. We also have a health and social care policy course, for a degree course, for those who are mainly interested in health and social care. Personally, my research interests are more around things like family and child poverty, although obviously all health and social care impacts all of those things. So why might you come to Ulster University? Ulster is the biggest university on the island of Ireland, and we have tens of thousands of local, national and international students. We have a reputation not just for world-class research, in which we really punch above our weight, but we also have, or try to have, excellence in teaching. And one of the things that our students tell us again and again is that they have a lot of support in their learning. So we have excellence in teaching, but also in the pastoral care that allows students to flourish, even if they have particular difficulties at home or health issues or whatever. Our graduate employment at Ulster is above the national average, and in fact, recent statistics have shown that graduates in humanities and in social sciences are actually preferred by employers over people with STEM degrees, which is not what you think if you just listened to discussions on the radio or the TV or whatever. Social policy at Ulster has a 100% overall student satisfaction rating in the National Student Survey. And were you able to come to Ulster, which for now you're more likely to be doing it, at least for the first semester this year, people will have, the new students will be likely to be being taught online. Hopefully by the time you folk are ready to come to us, we'll be back to teaching face to face. And we do have excellent study and recreational facilities, gyms, sports facilities, etc. Our courses, particularly the social policy course and the health and social care policy course, are very applied courses. So they actually make sure that they think all the time about what's going to happen to employment at the end. Are you going to be able to get a job? And along the way, we provide you not just with theoretical insights into social policy, but also we make sure that you have skills that employers are looking for when you're actually finished. There's also well-priced accommodation for students, and of course for those of you who are not from Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland is a very cheap place to live compared to almost anywhere else in these islands, and certainly for students from the south of Ireland, living in Belfast or in Derry or in Coleraine, really they are very cheap places to live compared to pretty much anywhere else on the island. And of course we also have a sports academy. So Ulster University has a lot to offer students. And in social policy, we really try to make our courses as absolutely relevant as possible. Now, what is social policy? Because I know there aren't A-levels in social policy. Really, what social policy is about looking at the problems in society. Now, you may say, but is that not sociology? And you're right, because I sort of tend to think that sociologists explore and examine the problems in the world. Social policy people try to solve those problems. And that's what social policy does. We actually look at issues like homelessness, like food banks, like child poverty, abuse of people, older people in nursing homes, all of those kind of things. And we don't just study them, we actually ask what can we do to end them based on the best possible evidence that's out there. So when you think about what social policy is and think about it in terms of the coronavirus pandemic, really all of the issues that have dominated the news in relation to the coronavirus are actually social policy issues. So when you take the issue of public health, why is it that poor people and people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds are more likely to die from COVID-19? That's a social policy issue. You can think about income replacement, whether it was a case of whether it's the government actually furloughing people and paying 80% of their wages, or whether it's people, the millions that are now signing on to universal credit, and for the first time for many of them realizing how little people on social security benefits actually get paid. That's income replacement. That's an issue that I teach about. Social security is a huge part of social policy. Education. When we've been talking about whether the schools should open or not in the next wee while, one of the issues that's been raised again and again is the education gap. The gap between the poorest children and the best off children, and the fact that it may get worse in the course of this pandemic. And one of the things that shock students when we first start talking about the link between child poverty and education is that even before you get to school, a child coming from who's been growing up in poverty is likely to be as much as 22 months behind their peers when they actually start school. And then there's the role of the civil servants. Just in the last couple of days, what's the role of SPADs, special advisors like Mr. Cummings, and how do they work within government? Those are the kind of things that we study in social policy. So it can be a really very, very interesting course, and one that is very relevant to almost every issue in society. So the question really about when you want to think about, is this the course for me? If you're somebody who wants to challenge the status quo, if you don't like the injustice and inequality that you see in the world and you want to do something to tackle it, then our degrees in social policy and in health and social care policy could be just right for you. Now, when we approach our teaching of those issues, we start with theoretical knowledge. So you do have to study some theory, and because it's important to have that background theoretical knowledge and the research skills that you would need to study any issue really. But we focus those on actually tackling social problems and providing politicians with the evidence base on which that they should be using to try to end some of the social problems that we face in our society. And some of the big issues that lecturers at Ulster in social policy at Ulster research on a regular basis and then teach are things like poverty and inequality, which we see growing bigger and bigger each day. We see the gap between the rich and the poor growing. We see the number of billionaires growing, and you'll have seen that Jeff Bezos, the head of Amazon, recently became a trillionaire. Interestingly, if you type that into your phone, the spell check will say it's not a word because it's a new word, trillionaire. There's never been one before. But we look at education, who does well within education, and why do some people do so much better than others? Discrimination issues, so disability, gender, race, these are all issues where people are discriminated against because of their gender, because of their disability, because of their race. And we explore what we can do to end that discrimination. Housing and homelessness, a big part, obviously, of if you want to end inequality. Housing inequality is a huge one. Increasingly, mental health is an issue that we need to explore, and particularly in Northern Ireland, where we have very severe mental health issues, perhaps as a legacy of our conflict, then we really need to look at how can we best promote good mental health and then treat poor mental health. The whole issue of access to health and social care is also unequal. It is actually the case that it's known as the inverse care law, that the poor people who most need access to health and social care are actually the least likely to get it. That sounds ridiculous, but that is actually what happens, the way that things are organised at the minute. And equality and human rights underpin all of those issues, really. So, if you had one thing to change, what would it be? If you could change just one thing? So have a think about that, and maybe we can talk about it. You can ask questions or whatever afterwards. I mean, one of the things that a lot of our students, when we ask them this question, when they arrive at day one, they say is that they'd want to end hunger. It used to be very difficult to persuade people that actually there's hunger in the UK. People would say, no, there's no hunger in the UK. Unfortunately, these days, students coming know that there's hunger in the UK because they've seen the food banks, maybe volunteered in a food bank or donated to a food bank, or maybe had to use a food bank themselves, or their family had to use a food bank, because very many of our students come from disadvantaged backgrounds. And one of the things that I'm really proud about Ulster University, and one of the reasons that I love working here, is that so many of our students come from disadvantaged backgrounds and are often one of the first in their family to go to university. I mean, one of the things that personally I really get angry and frustrated about is the fact that how long you live can depend on where you live. And so across the UK, on average, a boy who's born in one of the most affluent areas will outlive one who's born in the poorest part by nearly 11 years, and the girls by over 8 years. And that's really, really shocking. Like, if you were to say that here in Northern Ireland, if you were to say that, Protestants or Catholics die 11 years before the other religion or the other community background, they'd be blue murder, and quite rightly. But yet, it is the case that poverty and disadvantage literally takes years off people's lives. Literally. I mean, we talk about it takes years off my life, but actually it literally does. So we have to then say, we would say, well, what does social policy research tell us? Why is it that that there's this big life expectancy gap? And what the research tells us is that the poor are dying younger because they have less money in order to live a healthy life. They also have more pressures on them, more insecurity, and have less control over their life. And one of the interesting things that we have found in research about health inequalities is that actually not having so much control over your life literally shortens it. So it's really fascinating area, the whole area of health inequalities, and we've really seen it during this coronavirus pandemic. When you look across the water and you look at the number of people who've died in the UK and look at who they are, as well as being black and minority ethnic people, there are people like transport drivers, bus drivers, taxi drivers, cleaners, people at the low, who don't earn so much, people who are some of the poorest people are dying at, I think, about 4 times as much as better off people. So really, that's a very crucial issue for social policy. Another issue that a lot of young people are quite rightly worried about is the number of young people who are not in employment, education, or training. And again, this is one of the kind of issues that many of our young people, the students who come to us, say this is the kind of thing that they would like to see reversed. And then, of course, again, as a result of the pandemic, we have seen a real exposure of the problems faced by in adult social care. We've talked a lot and we've heard a lot on the telly about people dying in care homes, but it's not just about care homes, it's also about domiciliary care, it's about supported living, and it's not only about older people, it's about disabled young people as well. And one of the really shocking things, I think, is that within some of the care homes where those older people have been dying, there have been people who are not much older than all of you, people in their early 20s, but who are severely disabled and are put into nursing homes along with people in their 80s. Something really wrong there. So when we talk about levels of unmet need, that is one of the unmet needs. Disabled young people who, if they can't live at home with their parents, maybe because their parents are elderly or their parents have died, where do they go then? We have in Northern Ireland a very low rate of supported living accommodation, and as a result, many younger disabled people end up in care homes. As we've seen during the pandemic, care staff are very poorly paid, and very often poorly trained, and as a result, there can be inappropriate care and even neglect for some of our older people. So that's an area that actually we talk about a lot in our courses, in our social policy courses. I mean, there's a whole lot of other things that you might want to think about if you're thinking, am I really all that interested in social policy? We have an entire module on globalization and how globalization impacts on Northern Ireland. Excuse me, I should have said a module. It's like a wee course. So the excuse me, within your degree course, you would normally do each year 6 modules, so 6 different aspects of social policy. One of the modules we do is on race and racism, and that's race and racism globally as well as in Northern Ireland. We would talk about issues like, why is it that access to abortion is so restricted in Northern Ireland, even though it's now legal, still not necessarily possible to access an abortion. Has it made a difference having our own legislative assembly? Are the laws that are being made here in Northern Ireland better? Are they more suitable for us? And why are so few being made? The whole question of Brexit and the European Union, our relationship with the European Union. What are the implications for us in Northern Ireland of the UK leaving the EU? Not, what are the politicians shouting at each other about, but what are the actual facts that we can back up and say for sure, this is the impact it'll have. Here's a good impact it'll have, here's a bad impact it'll have. So we can actually see, what is really going on. And then the really big question, what or who influences policy? And that really is a very big question right across Europe, right across the UK, but also here in Northern Ireland. And very often here in Northern Ireland, it's not very transparent who it is that influences policy. So our degree structure. Each full-time honours degree is a 3-year degree. We have 2 semesters every year. One starting in September, one starting at the end of September, one starting the end of January. And then, as I said earlier, you have 3 modules each semester, 6 over the year. Now, a module usually means a 2-hour lecture and a 1-hour seminar every week. Then on top of that, you have 164 hours of independent study. So altogether 200 hours for each module. At each lecture, you'll get a recommended reading for your seminar, and you may also be set a task for the seminar. And while the lectures can be quite big, with maybe over 100 students in them, the seminars tend to be smaller, with maybe 15 to 20 students in them. So when you work it out, about 16% of your time, about 16% of your time is spent in lectures and seminars, and then the rest is independent study or group work. Although, of course, I have to say that your lecturers are always there to talk to you and to give you any advice that you might need outside of those times. We're all only an email away, actually. And then there's coursework submission throughout each semester and exams held in January and in May each year. And actually also in August for those of you who don't do so well in January or May. But I'm sure none of you will ever need a resit. So just to kind of start winding up a bit, when we talk about when we look at our social policy degree, it includes issues like poverty and social security, disability, gender, race and migration, adult social care, families and children, theories and concepts around welfare issues, how NGOs, voluntary organisations work, and research methods. We do a lot of research methods so that by the time you finish your degree, you will be able to undertake a small piece of research yourself, which you'll do for your dissertation. So your dissertation, 8 to 10,000 word dissertation, will be your own piece of research. And people can be very proud of that when they're finished, because it's really, really great to know that you've managed to do this yourself. So here are some of the year 1 modules. We do an introduction, obviously, to social policy and an introduction to health and social care policy. We have a study skills module. It's known as social policy skills and analysis, and it's really how to study social policy, but also how to study generally. Right at the start in first year, we're starting to talk about research methods, and in particular looking at qualitative research methods. And also about the governance of social policy, how social policy made, how is it delivered, and then finally the changing images of welfare, which is looking really at the political and historical changes in social policy through the decades. Now, I said earlier that we really have a big emphasis on employability, and that's absolutely right, because most of your lecturers will be people who worked outside of the university before becoming university lecturers. And we know where there are gaps in the labour market. We know where there aren't enough people to do the jobs that need to be done. So we try to give people a sound and critical knowledge and understanding of social policy and theory, and help them to become independent learners, so that when they do go out to work, that they're able to find out the knowledge that they need themselves. We ensure that you have problem-solving skills, that you can actually look at policies and problems and figure out how you can find the evidence about what works to solve those problems, and to be able to provide workable strategic solutions. We give students excellent research skills, both quantitative, i.e. with statistics, with facts and figures, but also qualitative. What is the lived experience like for people, for example, who are living in poverty, or for disabled people. And there's also at the end of your second year, a practical experience through work-based learning. We have a six-week full-time placement, and that will be in an organisation that looks at an area that you're interested in. So say you're interested in working with children, we try to get you a placement in, something like Save the Children or Bernardo's or Action for Children or a similar organisation. Or if you're interested in more politics or whatever, we can maybe try to get you a placement in the assembly. So assuming the assembly is up and running. By the way, that's another issue that we would be looking at is, why does our assembly collapse all the time? That's a social policy issue. So our placement, actually, sorry, forgot that this was a slide coming up. Our placement opportunities have included all of these organizations here, and many more. If there's something in particular that you're interested in, the chances are we will be able to get you a placement that suits you. Now, one of the advantages of being a student of health and social care policy or of social policy at UU is that you can benefit from the work of ARC. ARC is Northern Ireland Social Policy Hub, You probably heard of it mainly in relation to the Northern Ireland Life and Time Survey. So ARC carries out, sorry, I should have said ARC is a partnership between UU and Queen's, and between social policy experts in UU and in Queen's, and it carries out the Northern Ireland Life and Time Survey every year. But the main reason it exists is to make information about social policy accessible to everybody in society, to the civil servants, to the politicians, but to the average Joe and Josephine Soap as well. So that's something that you can benefit from. And as I said earlier, we do try to give people the best possible studies advice and pastoral support. So everybody gets a studies advisor assigned to them when they start, and that studies advisor will be their advisor for the 3 years of their degree. We tend to find that we don't see you very much in first year, that is more likely to be second year or third year when you come looking for that advice. But I would advise all of you, get to know your studies advisor early on, and then you can approach him or her easily if you do have any problems. And really important, if you do have any problems, come early. Come and tell us when you start having the problems. Don't wait until things have got really bad. All of our module coordinators are experts in their field. So, for example, as I mentioned earlier, I tend to teach poverty and social security and disability issues because they're the areas that I do my research in. Others will teach, for example, say race and migration, because that's what they're experts on. As well as having module coordinators, there's a year tutor. So you have a whole range of people that you can go and see if you have any issues. Everybody gets their own dissertation supervisor in third year. And each course, the social policy course, the health and social care course, has its own course director. It's also the case that we have a lot of staff-student consultation. So one of the first things that you do every year is elect your student reps. As well as your student union reps, we also ask you to elect a class reps, so that you can just talk about the actual issues within the course. And then there's a students' union, there's a career centre, there's student support. So if you have any disability or any particular needs, student support will ensure that you get all of the support you need in order to have the best possible student experience you can. So to sum up, social policy is both social action and it's the study of social action. It's about changing the way society runs at the minute and creating a new future, and hopefully a new future where there's less inequality and there's less poverty and less discrimination. So, social policy really does touch all of our lives. There is no area of human activity which social policy doesn't impact upon. How we choose to structure and organize society does affect individuals and collective welfare and well-being, and we need to ensure that the quality of people's lives is as good as it can be, and that people aren't discriminated against just because of where they were born, the color of their skin, the disability they have, the gender they are, whatever. So social policy is important because it looks at complex problems. It looks at the different ways in which those problems have been tackled, and it offers complex solutions to those complex problems. Now, in social policy, we have a very clear mission statement, which is to influence social, economic, and public policy. We want to educate future leaders in social and health policy, and we aim to inspire and to guide students to address the social problems that they learn about, to address the poverty, the social inequalities, the impact of global influences on society. And we do this principally by carrying out high quality research, which really informs and shapes our understanding of society, but also informs and shapes our teaching and our works with the governments in the UK and across the world, actually. And the lecturers that you will meet at Ulster University, we really do work with governments across these islands and across Europe. So that's enough for me, I think, and I hope that we have some questions.
Thank you very much for that, Goretti. That was absolutely fantastic and a great eagle-eye view of the social policy degree at Ulster University. I certainly learned a lot, especially of which the trillionaire isn't actually a word. Didn't know that. That's a piece of trivia I'll be using in my social circles and on Zoom quiz nights. So we do have an opportunity now for any questions you might have. Goretti, did you mention anything about career pathways, types of graduate roles that our students tend to go into? Maybe you've covered that already.
That's a good point. So some of our students have become very important people. So we've had assembly ministers who took social policy degrees. We've had permanent secretaries in the civil service who have social policy degrees, but actually most of our students would go to work either with the likes of the Health and Social Care Trusts, the Education Authority, voluntary organisations, community and voluntary organisations, and not just those actually, but also we have students who work with, who've gone on to work in the police, with probation boards, who've gone on to be social workers. So it's really a huge range, and it's actually considered to be a degree that opens up a lot of doors to you, not just not just a sort of a single track, and that there's very many different tracks. But we have a very high number of graduates who are in professional jobs within a year of them leaving finishing their degree.
So you're saying our courses at Ulster are pretty interesting because notable people join them. And actually, on an interesting point, doing a postgraduate degree myself at the university, the most recent former Justice Minister is currently studying one of our programs. So very interesting. We attract high caliber of people.
Yeah, well, social policy and politics are very closely aligned, so we do more the evidence bit than the politics bit, but actually we're very often looking at very similar things. And sometimes we get budding young politicians, people who fancy themselves as politicians, coming and doing maybe a social policy degree because they actually want to know about the nitty-gritty, not just about the about the nitty-gritty, about how things actually work, rather than just the kind of left-right politics or whatever.
And what's I suppose the geographic footprint that our social policy degree would have at Ulster in terms of connections, either across Ireland, the UK, Europe? Maybe I'm thinking with the European Parliament, or would we have people?
We have had graduates who've gone to work for the EU in Brussels and in Strasbourg. One of our graduates has actually been working in Kosovo for a long time now, so we go right over as far as over to China, actually the whole way to China. So there is, it is a very portable kind of a degree, and it does. Because I should have made it really clear that we don't only look at social policy in Northern Ireland. We're a very, very small place, so we very much look at the whole global, issues globally. And in Europe, and equip our students so that they can actually go anywhere and work, because the same policy issues are everywhere. If you look at America, if you look at China, if you look at South Africa, wherever you're looking, same issues everywhere.
Great, Goretti. There's a question that's just come in here through the Q&A, and it says, what does social policy with criminology include? Would it be leaning more towards one of those courses or an equal balance of the two?
Okay, so if you do social policy with criminology, what happens is remember I said that every year you would do 6 modules. So if you're doing social policy with criminology, then every year 2 of the modules that you do, 2 of the 6 modules will be criminology modules. And actually, like, criminology is a sub-branch of social policy. And so a lot of what you would be doing as part of social policy are very relevant to criminology. So say you take poverty and social security, we know that most people who end up in prisons actually come from poorer backgrounds. Most people who end up in prisons maybe already have a learning disability or a mental health issue. They're unlikely to have had a proper education, maybe been let down by the education system. So they're they're very close together. So you would do, say in second year, I'm just trying to think about some of the things I would say. In second year, you'd be doing, in semester one, you'd be doing poverty and social security and maybe theories and concepts of welfare, your social policy bits, and you might be doing crime and prison as your criminology module. So that's how it works too. So you end up having of the 18 modules that you'll undertake, you'll have 6 of those modules will be criminology modules.
So that's pretty much a 25% split. Would that be correct?
It's a it's a third, 2/3. It's more like 33%. Yeah.
Right. Okay, perfect. I hope that answers that question. If anybody has any more questions, keep firing them through. Goretti and I will hang about for another few minutes. But that is the end of the webinar. There won't be any other content been gone over or covered. So I'd like to thank Goretti for her time and going over the social policy degree. Anybody who wants to watch this back can do so. It will be uploaded. The recording will be uploaded to YouTube within the next hour or so. So thank you again, Goretti.
Can I say, Conal, if anybody has any questions that they think of like tonight or something, they're very welcome to drop me an email. My email is g.horgan, that's HORGAN, @ulster.ac.uk.